Assisted living, the new nursing home. We're talking about it today, and with me is our Vice President of Nursing, Stacy.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Yeah. Boy, where do we start? Let's start with our aging population. So it's 2025,
Yep.
and we're already almost through the first quarter of the year. Hard to believe.
I know.
And we have these baby boomers that are aging into our industry now, and
The last of the baby boomers, so the 1964 born, the last of them are retiring, entering the retirement population, the geriatric population. So the projection of that generation needing long-term care is...
we're here.
It
has arrived.
Oh, very much so. Yes.
And by 2030, it is projected that 1 in 5 Americans will be 65 years old or older. Crazy to think about.
Yeah, and them needing long-term care. The industry, healthcare has known this for a while. I remember being in nursing school and for my RN, and the instructors would go around the classroom and they'd be like, well, what area do you want to work in or specialize in? And everybody goes for like ER or trauma or, ICU. And I'm like, I want to work in geriatrics. And they would look at me like, what? And I'm like, this is back in like 2013, 2014. I'm like, yeah, it's projected by 2020 that population is going to outnumber the rest of us. So job security. And then who do you think you're taking care of? You're taking care of mostly older people in those areas as well. So,
and now it's 2025.
And we've bypassed that by quite a lot. Yeah, and a pandemic through that as well. So, we've seen nursing home closures because of financial issues. The pandemic, speaking of that didn't help nursing homes.
No, not at all.
And then we have staffing shortages in nursing homes. Their regulations, state regulations, federal regulations, because they receive Medicare and Medicaid funding. So assisted living is really going to have to pivot to meet the needs of this population that's growing and needs long-term care.
And in our marketplace here in Wisconsin, because we serve so many rural areas,
Yes.
we started to see the rural nursing homes fail. I want to say this has been going on for years now.
At least.
When we were first hearing about rural area nursing homes closing.
At least, yeah.
So this, for us, has been ongoing for quite some time. And then as it happens in another one of our communities, because we've got 28 buildings here, so we're all over the state, it doesn't come as a surprise to us, but every time it happens in a community, you see the people in that community on their social media like, what are we going to do? And this is so sad. And so it does affect entire communities, because when you have aging loved ones, you think about, well, now they're going to have to go to Madison, which is, 45 minutes away.
Or the next nearest large area, like up in Wausau, for example. We have several smaller communities. Are they all going to have to go to Wausau, where there's more nursing homes? And then you're traveling more than an hour to go see your loved one, which can impact your visits and how often you can visit. But we've definitely seen... Before our referrals, a lot of it came from an elderly person living at home with a family member, or a family member seeing that they're living by themselves, but there's care deficits, they're needing more help, or from the nursing home. That's where we were getting referrals, because they didn't need that level of care. They needed a lower level of care. And so that's where we get referrals. Now we're seeing these referrals come right from the acute hospital, not to a nursing home. So it's definitely increasing our acuity level, and we've had to look at increasing the level of acuity we can take in terms of medications, diabetes, wound care, all of these things that in years past, we wouldn't take. But we've definitely had to pivot in order to take, because that's where our referrals are coming from. That's what our communities need, because there's no place for them to go.
When I started in the industry 16 years ago, our client group was completely different than it is now.
Yes.
So much has changed. And now every year we're looking and reviewing things. What can we do? Mm-hmm. We're getting these referrals. How can we accommodate that? Can we accommodate that? And we definitely are doing things different. And the industry is going to continue to change at this point.
We've substantially increased our nursing staff, our skilled nursing staff, to read those referrals, provide education, RN delegation, training at those locations to meet the needs of the referrals, the community, which I only see that increasing, which is great. I think it definitely, for our caregivers, it gives them something to, it keeps them interested. It's something different. It's something new. It's a new skill that they get to learn and use.
I think we've definitely in these rural areas also seen an increase in home care.
Yes.
So families are trying to navigate the changing industry, the lack of nursing home services with either home care or
home health nursing, assisted living. And we work with home health agencies, nursing in terms of if they have certain type of wound care or medications, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy in some settings. They come in and they provide that service in the assisted living or memory care. We also work closely with hospice care so that they don't have to go to a higher level of care. We can keep them in the assisted living where they've created that home. It's called aging in place. I know is a big thing. And we utilize ancillary services as best as we can to keep them with us instead of having to move yet again to another place.
And there's a whole other movement that I'm hearing about out there, and that's hospital at home. Do you know much about this?
I've heard
much about it?
A little bit about it. I haven't looked into it too much.
I haven't either, but
that's an interesting concept, though. Hospital at home and how that looks, how that works, and how that works in a rural area.
Yes.
In traveling of doctors and nurses, and how far that's going to reach out.
What little bit I've heard about it, for those listening, is that hospitals would actually move or send patients back home, and then the medical care would come to them. That's what little bit I know about it, and I'm interested in watching what becomes of it, because anytime there's something new, you're like, how does that exactly work?
Yeah, there's so many logistical things around that. That would be interesting to see and keep an eye on.
Yeah, for sure. So what we're seeing is, for us, is the trends of nursing home closures within the state. I don't know. I don't have that exact statistic. I'm not sure if we have it here.
In the United States, it said there were 774 nursing home closures, with more expected. I can't remember the years in between that happened. I think it was like February 2020 to July 2024. There were 774 closures.
That's crazy.
In the United States. And that's only going to continue because of financial pressure and staffing shortages. Yeah, that's a huge impact for the population that needs long-term care.
And unfortunately,
Indefinitely.
you've had the labor force that have really struggled in the industry. They're looking now to work other places instead of the nursing homes, because they were running short-staffed, long hours, and people just said, especially during COVID, they were just walking out. Like, enough is enough.
Yeah, and hence why assisted livings are becoming the new nursing home, where are nurses with long-term care experience going to go? Assisted living, memory cares.
Right. Yep, and we're definitely filling in that gap, and we're seeing that happen. So I know that Dr. Oz recently,
with a Senate hearing, yes.
With the Senate hearing, he testified because they were discussing as to whether a nursing home could run without nurses.
Without a nurse, yeah. Apparently, there's Senator Wyden. There's a bill that's coming up for review again, and it essentially is, or do they require an RN in a nursing home? And the obvious answer is, yeah, it's called a nursing home. But as you stated, with nurses leaving nursing homes, nursing home closures, staffing issues, he's looking at or exploring AI technologies to fill in those gaps, telehealth. I don't know if I quite agree with that. I guess old school, coming from working in a nursing home for the majority of my career, you always had an RN charge nurse on duty, and then LPNs or LVNs.
Because typically a nursing home needs a nurse.
Yeah, because it's skilled care. The residents require 24 hours skilled care, so it has to be provided by a skilled professional. I don't know how you'd get around that with AI or telehealth.
I don't either.
Yeah,
Unless all of a sudden the federal regulations and the state regulations are going to change, which I don't really foresee that happening.
No, and then he states that we're going to have 68 million people on Medicaid, increased to 90 million people on Medicaid that require long-term care. I don't know. I think that's an interesting thought or concept, how AI or telehealth would fill in that gap without a nurse in a nursing home 24 hours. I don't know about that.
I've already heard of more families stepping up, taking care of their loved ones. I think that's already a trend. I don't know the statistical number of that, but you do see and hear more and more of that happening, where they're using home health, just like we talked about, or hospice. And then the family members are stepping up and
taking turns.
Yes.
Or hiring. There's companies that you can hire private caregivers, albeit very expensive option, to fill in those gaps as well, of somebody not being in the home or needing more assistance with certain ADL cares like transferring and bathing. So definitely an option as well. But with our elderly population living longer, how long is that sustainable for a family? Children are still working or still raising their family while their elderly parent is declining or need more assistance. So once again, I think that's where assisted living and memory cares are.
And we have seen the trend, though, of residents coming in and their length of stay being shorter. So that tells us they're not coming in as early as they used to.
No.
So whether part of that was caused by COVID or part of it is just the industry in a whole, not sure.
I'm not sure. But, and quite a few times it's like an emergency, like the family can't do this anymore, or situations have changed for the family, and
mom or dad's in the hospital, something has changed and they can't do it anymore.
And the social worker or the doctor is saying they cannot go back home to their previous living situation because of safety issues, and they're discharging in a day or two. We need to get them somewhere immediately. So I've seen definitely an uptick in those type of admissions, not somebody who's coming in, just shopping around, looking at different assisted livings. It's like, I'm here touring because I need a place for my mom to go tomorrow. The hospital says that they're discharging them. So
okay,
we've definitely had a pivot in our admission process, and quick turnaround on saying, yep, we can take them, or getting up to the hospital to do an assessment. Before it was, you had some time. Now it feels like you get the referral and we need to make a decision quick.
Oh, yeah, because the hospital wants to also free up the bed.
Yes.
And they need to get that person placed. And the nursing homes that are existing currently, I'm hearing that they're more like rehabs.
Yes.
And that's what they seem to be really focused on.
That
more so
Yep.
than doing memory care. How do you know of nursing homes that are still offering memory care?
I only
in
know
our
one of
markets?
in this area that has a locked unit for memory care. Where I had worked previously out in California, they didn't do that. Their focus back in 2014, 10 years ago, was a shift towards more after hospital care, so more skilled things such as, chest tubes, IV antibiotics or IV meds, pretty in-depth wound care, and then that short stay, like physical therapy, occupational therapy, and discharge. So out in California, they were already pivoting to that, and they don't even call them nursing homes. They're like transition. So they're even changing their name or their classification because that's what they're providing. It's not, a long-term care, they're decreasing the number of beds for long-term care, Medicaid, and transitioning more to duly certified Medicare, Medicaid, and treating that short term.
What are we hearing with the nursing homes that we do work with? Because we do work closely with nursing homes. How are they doing regarding having nurses and CNAs? And are they holding it together, or do they have wings closed? We were hearing about closure of certain wings and limiting a number of people.
Yes.
What's the latest with that?
Still hearing that those wings that they've closed down are still closed. They haven't opened back up because of staffing issues. I think it's still about the same, and I think the staffing issues they were always there. I think they're just always going to be there. And of course, with the pandemic, I think that really impacted. And I think if people were going into nursing, I bet they thought real long and hard about it during the pandemic. I was a nurse during the and I'm like, ooh, like, is this still so? I mean, nursing school doesn't teach you for a pandemic. It's just, when I went to nursing school, we weren't taught how to deal with a pandemic or work within a pandemic. So I bet there were quite a few people who decided to maybe change a major or go into something else.
Or retire.
A lot of people
just retired. They're like, I was going to work 5 more years, but I'm done.
But I'm here. I'm close. I'm done.
That was enough of that.
Yeah. And hey, who would blame them, right, for choosing that if that was an option? Yeah, it's definitely interesting to think about. I mean, we were already in a nursing shortage as it was. But I think the pandemic just made it way worse.
My sister was a RN in a local nursing home, and this nursing home is no longer open, so I can talk about this. And she reported as the RN charge that the last day that she worked, and her help for 2 wings, and I could be wrong. But she got there, and it was the file clerk from the medical office. That's who was on the floor, was not a CNA.
Oh, wow.
To help her. And that was the last day she worked. She says, I can't do it.
No.
I won't do it. I won't put my license at jeopardy. And that was right around the time of the pandemic. And I can't remember, a few years ago, but she's like, that's it.
Yeah.
And she didn't have a backup plan. She was just like this is crazy. I can't do it. And I think a lot of, unfortunately, great nurses, because she's a great nurse.
Oh, I have the pleasure of working with her. I know she's a great nurse.
And a lot of nurses found themselves in that situation. That is their license.
Yeah, and you're taking what you feel is an unsafe assignment. How are you divvying up your time and providing quality care to all those residents? And then especially with an unlicensed, that you're supervising, providing care.
We talked
that's
her
a
into
tough
coming over
situation.
and working for us part-time.
Oh,
now.
we sure did. We were like, come on. She wasn't gone a day. We're like, we got a job for you. No.
So there's definitely still a need out there for these nurses, and they play such an important role, whether it's in the hospitals, the nursing homes, and now assisted living. As we have increased over the last few years, we've increased both licensed practical nurse and RNs. We've definitely seen the increase and needed that support to provide those services to people within our
Yes, and it's definitely a challenging position. I've always worked in long-term care, so I'm, I'm very biased. I think it's one of the best areas in healthcare you can work in. And for our nurses, it's a lot of thinking outside of the box. And it's a lot of directing the directors or finding home health or how can we provide this. You don't have a supply closet that you can walk down to and get the supplies you need. So it's a lot of thinking outside of the box and involving other agencies or help. And it's every week we encounter something different where we have to think outside the box to meet the needs of the resident, which is definitely challenging. And I think it keeps us all really engaged and involved. And
So now, like, we don't do wound care, for example. How do we manage that now?
with outside services, so home health in the area. At WALA, the Wisconsin Assisted Living Association, holds that conference every year. They have vendors there, which we connect with to service certain locations, or our companies, wound care companies that service the entire state. Very easy to make referrals. We don't even have to have a doctor's order. We can make the referral right to that company. They run the insurance. They set it up. They come out.
And then they come in.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say we have a resident that has a need. How often do they come in and support us? If we call them, they're there, or are they on a regular schedule of visit? How does that work?
It's usually we call them, make a referral, and then they set up the treatment plan for that resident. So if it's wound care 2 to 3 times a week, they're out there 2 to 3 times a week, whatever the orders may be. They'll meet the need for providing that wound care. And it could be an RN or an LPN.
And if we feel we might need them to look at it or additional services, that's just a phone call.
Yes, absolutely.
And then
phone call,
they'll
face
come.
sheet, insurance, demographics, and and then they're on their way out.
So assisted living has become very skilled at finding resources
Yes.
to fill in the gap that used to be skilled care.
Absolutely.
And as the aging population has needed the help.
Yep, like lab work, X-rays. I've drawn blood for one of our residents who couldn't get up to get a blood draw because of mobility issues, and the family lived out of state. So we can coordinate. I coordinated with the lab at the hospital to go get the supplies, come in. That's covered under a certain waiver that we have for all of our locations to do those things. And that's how we fill in those gaps.
So assisted care converting to memory care. This is a recent trend that we are seeing in our industry as well. So unfortunately, dementia continues to grow amongst our aging population. And as our aging population gets larger, we're seeing an increase for the need of memory care.
And I think it's earlier detection of dementia too. We have physicians have all of these, or practitioners have all these tools to diagnose it earlier as mild cognitive, neurocognitive impairment, major neurocognitive impairment. I think that's the accepted terminology for diagnosis. But they have all of these tools, and then of course, education of the public of dementia symptoms, going to the provider, getting that diagnosis. And I think it opens our eyes to, at some point, we may need care. And we're seeing an increased need for specific memory care because of wandering behaviors, or I don't really like to call them behaviors, or elopement issues. So a definite need for a designated facility for memory care versus assisted care.
And what are the challenges for staff that are taking care of individuals with dementia?
They can't communicate their needs. So we call them behaviors, but they're really indicating a need and it could be a physiological need, an emotional need. So the staff have to be investigators and there's special training. There's a lot of extra training and education that goes into a caregiver for a dementia or a memory care unit, because they can't just say, hey, I'm thirsty. They're showing you in other ways, and they have to investigate that. So how do we train our nurses how are they looking at charting investigating to figure out what that need is for that resident. So a lot more time and energy goes into specifically training and education for memory care and dementia.
Are we seeing any trends with, are people becoming, or are people exhibiting signs of dementia earlier in age? Or
I think
are
they're
we
just
seeing
recognized probably earlier. I'm not sure. Any numbers or any research has been done on that, but I bet it's because people are recognizing it more. And if you watch TV, there's many more commercials about new dementia medication or recognizing the signs of dementia earlier than I think there has ever been in the past. So family members, they're like, oh, it triggers. They've seen something on the news or a commercial for a dementia medication, and they're seeing it. They're like, oh, that could be not just forgetfulness in old age, as we age, but it could be indicating an actual issue with memory impairment.
how effective has the medications for dementia been for people? It seems like it's kind of hit and miss, but do we see it? Does it slow it down for some people?
Without referencing any studies or looking at that, I'm not quite sure. By the time residents are admitted to us, they're really into some later stages of dementia, especially in our memory cares. And they are on those medications. They have been on those medications that slow the progression of dementia for years at that point. It's hard to say without reading some research on it, but the residents who are coming to us have been on those medications for a very long time.
My dad had dementia, and it started in the late 90s. And back then, the medications were still considered experimental, and his insurance would not cover them.
Because they're brand name. The generic probably hadn't come out yet.
Those things hadn't come out. And I remember at the time, the idea behind it was supposed to help slow down the process. So I didn't know if we had seen throughout the years
those same drugs are
significant.
still used. The generic form came out, so most insurances cover the generic form. And they've been around, I've been a nurse since 2005, and we're still given those same drugs.
Same medications that we're using.
Yep.
How do we manage the wandering in assisted living? So you had mentioned earlier, nursing homes, they have lockdown areas for individuals with dementia. But in assisted living, we have to operate under different regulatory requirements. So how is that managed?
Correct. So they're not locked units. We have what we call a delayed egress, which, if I'm not mistaken, we have to get approval through the state in order to put in our building. So if delayed egress is essentially the door is not locked, but you go up to the door and you have to push on it for 15 seconds for it to actually open. And then our residents wear a little band, it kind of looks like a watch. It's called a wander guard. There's other names for it. But if they're close to the door and they're trying to get out, it alarms. And it's a pretty loud alarm. And it alerts the staff that a resident is close to an exit or trying to exit. Even if somebody's coming in from the outside and put the code in, if a resident is near that exit door and is wearing one of those wander guards, which all of them do in our memory care, it alarms and tells the staff, hey, somebody's trying to get out or
I mean, it alarms, like fire alarm.
Very
alarms.
loud. You can't miss it. Yeah. So there's a whole process that we have to go through with the state to get approved. And I know we got the approval and in the process of converting one of our assisted cares to a memory care to fit that need based on our referrals. All of our referrals are for memory care. So we've decided to transition that location from an assisted care to memory care, having to get that delayed egress put in and approval from the state in order to do that.
So 2025, here we are. I remember a long time ago, and I thought 2025 was a long ways away, and now we're here today. What do you see as far as industry trends, whether it's in AI or things that are going to assist us with individuals that are aging that you think are exciting?
What Dr. Oz had alluded to, the telehealth part, we've actually participated in a lot of telehealth. We've assisted the residents or their family set it up, use one of our laptops even, so that they could see the doctor or nurse practitioner, what have you. Which is great because we have a lot of issues with mobility and transportation.
Yes.
Once again, being in rural communities, it's not like they can just hop in a cab. Some places don't even have cab companies.
Or Ubers.
Or Ubers.
Yeah.
Or if they do, they're not wheelchair vans. So you see those in more populated areas, but not in these very small rural areas. So the telehealth part of it has been a huge benefit for us. And then, of course, with COVID and telehealth becoming such a widely used avenue to get visits done, et cetera, I see that becoming more of a thing versus having to go up to a clinic and be seen by your primary. And even seeing for referrals to specialists, an endo or your endocrinologist or maybe your eye doctor or what have you, being telehealth. It has been very beneficial. So hopefully we'll see that trend continue, because I know one of the hardest things for our directors is, how do we get them up there?
And families, too.
And family, like how do I get them in the car? I have a truck. They can't get into the truck. So that's definitely been a benefit. So I hope that trend definitely continues.
I know there's some exciting stuff, too, with fall detection that we've been watching.
It's not radar, it's something else, but it's very neat, yes.
Yeah, and right now we're in that time frame where you're watching to see how all of these tools develop and how we can use them in the future. It is very interesting. It's very intriguing to watch these things.
We go to these conferences, we get all these cool ideas we want to investigate and look into.
Like, how can we implement this?
How can we get that?
Great. But it's still so new to the industry that some of these things. There was one tool out there where there was a dining room robot that you could get that would serve the meals. Now, I've heard of somebody else in an assisted living using this or trying it out, and they did say they've moved away from it. So, you got to give things a try, but
maybe
who knows?
They went back to the research and development phase maybe on that. Well, I still see those
Maybe they're taking the meals down the hallway and forget to come back with it.
Wrong. Yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure.
We're Talking About It is brought to you by Our House Senior Living. Visit us at ourhouseseniorliving.com.
Okay, Teepa Snow, a dementia care expert, developed a model known as GEMS. GEMS of empathy, moments, and safety. States of brain change to describe progression of dementia. This model categorizes individuals into 6 stages based on their cognitive ability and behaviors. So there is the blue stage, which is the early stage with minimal cognitive decline. Then there is the mild cognitive impairment with habits and routines. Moderate. We're often seeing they have the orange, the severe cognitive decline.
Yes.
Yeah.
In our memory cares.
These other unfortunate stages, and I remember my dad going through this, the person is aware that they're forgetting things and they're having dementia, and but by the time he went to memory care, I would call him, he was at a severe cognitive decline with the confusion. And then there's the end stages, what they call the pearl or the white end stage, with limited communication and responsiveness at the end. And this is where residents will lose the ability to communicate, as you were talking about earlier, where we have to become investigators based on what they may be, what body language they are exhibiting at that point. And you're right, we call them behaviors, and that's not the best word, but we understand what that means. But it's the body language, because they can no longer communicate their needs. So we're trying to interpret and understand what their need is based on what they may be doing. My dad, in his end stage, when he stood up, he usually had to go to the restroom. He'd be sitting, and all of a sudden he'd stand up.
Yep.
And that was the indication. He didn't even have to say it. the staff would see him, and they'd come right over and get him to the restroom. And they knew what that meant. So residents can exhibit these types
The
of
same
signs.
things. Fidgeting, restlessness, and
Calling
then
out.
calling out, and even calling out for people or things from long time, mom in their past, or
Dad.
a lot of looking for children, or they need to get their children, or they have to pick them up from school.
Anxiety. Yeah.
So they revert back to stages in their life or a certain time period, and it very well could be meeting a need. They're tied to these routines that they lived for a good portion of their life.
I feel like they need to be doing something. I think boredom, too, is a real challenge in memory care.
Yes.
Because they're sitting there. We've had purpose our whole life. And what are we supposed to be doing right now?
Exactly.
And these are some of the challenges that we have to work with individuals.
Yeah, too much stimulation, not enough stimulation in an environment. So when we have, when our
Or
memory
it's
care
time to
training,
milk the cows.
yeah,
Time to do the chores.
like, why are they getting up at 3-4 o'clock in the morning? Well, they were a farmer, so that was their routine. And
Common thing that we see.
yeah, and they come in and, we have meals at certain times, but it's us pivoting and being more accommodating to what their lifestyle was, the things that they did every day, and how can we meet that need as best as possible in this new setting for them. In some of our more of our rural communities, like you said, a lot were farmers, or they were outside all day fixing their machinery. So we've created what we call memory boxes, where in one gentleman, we put like nuts and bolts and stuff, and he would tinker around with those all day long. That was a great activity to keep him occupied. He had to use his hands. He couldn't just sit, watch TV or read. He was used to being outside using
had a
his
purpose.
hands. Other times, even just folding laundry, even though you're like, ugh, but it keeps them busy, it keeps them moving, something to do, especially if they're up wandering around looking for something to do. They may not necessarily have to go to the bathroom or hungry or in pain. They're bored. So in giving them those memory boxes are a really cool, neat idea that we've implemented in quite a few of our locations to give them something to do.
How important is it with, elderly population in general, not just memory care? I know it's important in memory care too, but that element of physical touch.
As you age, it's a need that doesn't go away, but
Right.
at all. If I think the perception is maybe it does, it's a need that you don't have to address anymore. But yeah, holding hands or a hug,
Hand on the shoulder.
hand on the shoulder.
Hand on the forearm.
So there's this thing called hand under hand, especially with the later stages of dementia. Instead of, grabbing somebody by the hand or leading them, it's this way of putting your hand under their hand so they get your touch and connection, but they also feel that they're leading the situation, the conversation, or they have the ability to communicate their need, and you're taking time with them. I think that's one of my favorite interventions to put into place, with especially as you get into the later stages of dementia, because you're physically making a connection, but as a caregiver, it makes you slow down when you do that. Versus, I know we can get into this mindset of, I got to do this, we got to do this, we got to get this done, it's going to be lunchtime. But for me, it really makes me mentally slow down and get in tune and take a moment to figure out what they're trying to communicate. So we have some residents who they have trouble finding words, the wrong word comes out, it can get very confusing, and then we want to throw out, do you need this? Do you need this? How overwhelming that must be for somebody who can't find the right words or any words to communicate. So sometimes silence and doing that hand under hand technique and just being silent and letting them, giving them the time to communicate. They might not even communicate, but just having that break and not throwing 1,000 things at them, I think is really important. I think by far that's one of my favorite interventions to train on, to utilize. I think it gets us out of that mind frame of rushing or completing tasks and being present and connecting with why are you here in the first place.
And I think reminding the staff or educating the staff too is one thing at a time. Mm-hmm. So you're asking a question, if you are trying to get down to the bottom of something with someone, you ask you slow it way down, ask one question at a time, let that person with dementia process what the request is. And wait for the response also. I think sometimes we're in a hurry and we don't always think about that.
And that's the benefit, I think, of our communities is they are small home-like environments, which I think is conducive to the ability to be able to do that. We're not these large facilities with, tons of rooms, beds, residents. We are smaller, so it does give our caregivers time to slow down, make those connections, and really dive into figuring out what this behavior, if lack of a better word, is indicating for that resident. A need, a physical need, boredom, maybe it's too much going on in the environment, and how we can adjust the environment or meet their physical need.
And adapt to their way of communication is learning what those body signs are or words are for everyone. I know years ago there was a story, we had a resident and the word was apple, but that was coffee.
Coffee?
Yeah. If she'd get up in the morning and say apple, 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 it was coffee.
It was coffee.
And the staff it took them a while to figure it out. They'd bring her an apple and she was like, no.
I don't want an apple.
It took them a while to figure out that as she was learning her verbal, as she was losing her way of verbally communicating, that apple became coffee.
Coffee, yeah.
And it's very difficult also for family members. It's very difficult, and that's where caregivers are so important because as people decline and it becomes harder for family to visit, sometimes you see that decline in visits from family, and caregivers become that family role model.
It's hard for families when
absolutely hard.
Your loved one no longer recognizes you.
Yeah.
And sometimes even, it's unfortunate, but visits can exacerbate behaviors.
Yes.
Because their loved one came and visited, but then they're leaving and they're having to stay. You sometimes see an increase in trying to leave, wandering. Agitation. It's really unfortunate because you want the family to visit, of course, but in some situations it can definitely exacerbate, and they're trying to leave or wanting to leave. And that behavior can last not just for a couple of hours. It could be for a couple of days that they're perseverating on wanting to leave or needing to go home because of a visit. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was hard with the end stages with my dad was getting him just to sit down and try to visit with him. Even to visit him about anything. He didn't want to sit. He'd look at you. He didn't he didn't put it together. And he just wanted to get up and walk around because that's what he liked to do. He didn't want to sit and have small talk.
Yeah, we have...
So you go try to visit, and you were lucky if you got a 5-minute window to try to have his attention and try to be carrying it, and he would just look at you, and you could tell those days because it was empty. It wasn't registering.
There's no recognition.
Yeah.
We have the residents, we do have some residents who they can't sit still. They're constantly moving, and even at meal times, it's hard to get them to sit. So with those, we've implemented like finger foods, something that they could, they're not going to sit still. They're going to wander or take a couple of steps, that they can still eat a meal. They're not necessarily sitting for the meal, but they're finger foods so they can still get nutrition.
Sandwich.
Supplemental shakes that they can at least like hold and walk, because that is very challenging at times when they need to eat. They sometimes, experience weight loss because of all that physical activity they're doing nonstop from the time they get up to the time they go to bed, and they're not getting enough nutrition. So that's definitely, it's a good intervention, finger foods, supplemental shakes, stuff like that.
There's also the DICE approach.
Yes. This, a nurse practitioner that comes into one of our locations was the first to tell me about it. And I think the University of Wisconsin, they actually put on like a free participation and training at some point. This was, I think, pre-pandemic. But DICE stands for describe. So it's the who, what, where, when. You're investigating. And then the investigate. So health, medications, caregiver factors, environmental issues. So you're looking at the big picture, and you're putting all those things that could be contributing to this behavior. And then based on what you find and what you think the root cause is of this behavior, you create a plan to respond to the behavioral issue that's being exhibited. So more education, a different approach, the hand under, memory boxes, going for daily walks when the weather is good, getting them outside. There are certain activities that we can implement that help with behaviors. Maybe the environment is too stimulating so they don't go to certain activities. Like we have a lot of musicians coming in play. Sometimes for residents with dementia, that can be overstimulating and cause behaviors. So maybe we take them to somewhere else and we do a different, quieter activity with them. And then you're going to create that plan, and then in a specific amount of time, you're going to come back and reevaluate that plan. And it's a whole team approach. It's not just the nurse coming in and the director saying, oh, we're having this, and this issue. The nurse is consulting with the director, the caregivers on the floor, looking at charting for different times of day, because you have sundowning. So between they used to call it the witching hour, but between the hours of like 2 and like 4 or 5 o'clock, you can see a huge spike in agitation and behaviors. Sometimes explainable, a lot of the times it's not. They're fine all day long, but between these hours, it's just difficult. So we're looking at charting and then creating that plan through an assessment, our care plan, and putting in appropriate interventions, and then coming back and reevaluating it. So the caregivers document every shift a behavior that was exhibited, and then the intervention that they tried, and if it was effective or not. So if it's not really effective, we need to change it up. We need to look at the environment again and start this whole process over. Because it can get really difficult when, like, I have a director come to me, or I'm in a building, they're like, yeah, this, resident so-and-so, we just can't figure out what this is or what they need. This is really a template for us to start at the beginning and look at everything. Medications can come into play as well. You really want to do non-pharmacological before you start adding in medications. Our residents a lot of times are already on so many meds, and when you get 5 or more meds, you're polypharmacy, you're increasing risk for side effects, drug-to-drug interactions. So we talk about this at our regional monthly meetings. The nurses utilize this when we're reviewing charting, looking at particular situations that are difficult or things that aren't working for the caregiver.
If all of a sudden we see a significant change with someone that is outside of what their normal is, what are some of the first things we look at? That
could indicate delirium. So there's a difference between delirium and dementia. Delirium is acute, usually an acute onset, and it could be from, a lot of the times it's an infection. So if you see that spike happen or that change happen pretty rapidly, we're notifying the physician. Sometimes they need to go to the emergency room because vital signs are not, or the confusion just increased pretty significantly. So ruling out infection, urinary tract infection, upper respiratory, pneumonia, bronchitis, the whole thing.
And they can't always communicate that, hey, I don't feel good.
Yeah, like I'm having trouble going to the bathroom, or, I have a cough. Sometimes vital signs don't indicate any changes, just with physiological changes as we age. Their baseline temperature could be lower and they're actually running a fever, but to us, it's not like your child who has a fever of 101. You're like, oh, something's wrong. It could just be 1 or 2 degrees above baseline, but still technically be kind of within range, but they actually have a fever. So sending them out or calling the doc and asking if we can get an order for a urine sample to get it tested, lab work to be done, looking at electrolyte imbalances. That plays a big part in the DICE as well. Was there a medication change recently? So it's taking all of those factors into consideration and then ruling out if it was delirium or not. And that, I mean, and it could just be simple as addressing whatever is causing the delirium. That resolves and they return back to baseline.
There is a lot to know when it comes to dementia care.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I remember way back when, I don't know if you remember this, but we've learned so much and we're so much better at managing and caring for people, because it used to be you were trying to reorientate them.
Yes.
And then they were just angry.
Oh, that made made the situation even worse, because now you're arguing with them that it's
Right.
not 1952. And so we've learned,
We've learned so much.
Yes.
We've come so far.
you have to meet them where they're at. That's, yes.
And hopefully the ultimate goal with dementia is that we find a cure.
Yeah.
That would be the ultimate goal. I mean, I think we all want that. And I think about that. I'm one of 7 kids, and I always worry about that with my siblings. Is that's in our family history, and so the ultimate goal is they find a cure for this disease that robs people of so much. Well, we talked about it today. Assisted living
Yes.
as the new nursing home, and as you can see, our resident specialist here. Stacy, the VP of Nursing, with so much knowledge that helps us do what we do best, which is to provide care and solutions for our aging seniors. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.